The 1980s didn't care about comfort ratings or fuel charts. It cared about one thing: survival. This was the decade when trucks were built heavy, over-engineered, and brutally simple. Frames thicker than modern axles, engines designed to run forever, and reliability that didn't need a warning light. These trucks weren't meant to impress. They were meant to outlast everything around them. Today, we're counting down the 10 trucks from the 1980s that defined toughness, the machines that set the standard and proved what real durability looks like. Watch closely, because this is where toughness earned its meaning. Number 10. Isuzu F-Series. In the 1980s, toughness didn't always announce itself with size or noise. Sometimes it arrived quietly, clocked millions of kilometers, and outlived everything around it. That is exactly how the Isuzu F-Series earned its reputation. These trucks were never marketed as monsters, yet they became some of the longest-serving medium-duty work trucks in the world. Isuzu approached truck engineering with discipline rather than bravado. The diesel engines used in the F-Series were deliberately understressed, running at lower RPMs than many competitors. This reduced heat, internal friction, and wear, three of the biggest killers of commercial engines. The blocks were thick, internals were heavy, and fuel injection was fully mechanical, meaning the engine would continue running even when fuel quality was poor or maintenance was irregular. Frames were straightforward ladder designs with very few stress concentration points. There was no unnecessary shaping or weight reduction. The philosophy was simple: if it doesn't improve reliability, don't add it. Suspensions were basic leaf spring setups that could handle constant overloading without collapsing. Gearboxes were slow, mechanical, and incredibly forgiving. Operators could abuse them daily and still finish the shift. What truly defined the F-Series was uptime. These trucks became favorites in construction fleets, municipal services, and regional freight operations because they stayed on the road. Breakdowns were rare, and when something did fail, repairs were simple and cheap. In many parts of Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, 1980s Isuzu F-Series trucks are still operating today, often with their original engines. They didn't define toughness through brute force. They defined it through survival. Number 9. Volvo F10, F12. The Volvo F10 and F12 represent a very different interpretation of toughness. Where some manufacturers relied on sheer mass, Volvo relied on engineering intelligence. These trucks were designed to survive extreme long-haul conditions across Europe's harshest terrain: mountains, icy roads, overloaded trailers, and endless hours of operation. Volvo's diesel engines were built with longevity as the primary target. Instead of pushing maximum horsepower, engineers focused on torque curves that reduced drivetrain shock and engine stress. Cooling systems were oversized, oil flow was generous, and internal components were designed for long service intervals. These engines were capable of running continuously for days without overheating, something that defined toughness in real freight operations. Frames and chassis were reinforced specifically at known fatigue points, which dramatically increased lifespan. Gearboxes and differentials were heavy and conservative, often lasting longer than the body itself. Volvo also paid attention to vibration management, which prevented the slow destruction of wiring, mounts, and cab structures over time. What truly separated the F10 and F12 from competitors was balanced durability. The cab wasn't an afterthought, it was part of the structural system. Reduced vibration and improved driver ergonomics meant less fatigue, fewer mistakes, and longer usable life for both truck and driver. That translated directly into productivity. Fleet operators loved these trucks because they could reliably cross 1 million kilometers with proper maintenance. Many did far more. Volvo proved that toughness didn't require brutality. It required understanding how systems fail and designing against that failure. Number 8. Mercedes-Benz NG series. The Mercedes-Benz NG Neue Generation series was engineered with almost stubborn dedication to longevity. These trucks weren't designed for trends or marketing cycles. They were designed to be assets that paid for themselves over decades. Mercedes engineers approached toughness with a military-grade mindset. Engines were massive, slow-revving diesel units with extraordinary thermal stability. These power plants could haul heavy loads continuously without overheating, even in desert conditions. Gearboxes were heavy, precise, and designed to be rebuilt repeatedly rather than replaced. The NG frame was one of the strongest of its era. Thick steel rails resisted torsional fatigue, allowing the truck to survive broken roads, construction sites, and off-road hauling that destroyed lesser designs. Axles and suspension components were deliberately oversized, providing enormous safety margins under overload conditions. One of the defining traits of the NG series was predictability. Operators knew exactly how the truck would behave under load. Mechanics appreciated the logical layout, accessibility, and standardized components. These trucks were designed to be understood, not guessed at. That's why NG trucks became legendary in Africa, the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and large infrastructure projects worldwide. They didn't break suddenly, they aged slowly, and when rebuilt, they came back stronger. Toughness isn't just strength. It's the ability to keep earning money long after others are scrapped. Number 7. Hino heavy-duty trucks, early Profia lineage. Hino's heavy-duty trucks of the 1980s rarely appear in Western discussions of toughness, but they absolutely should. These machines formed the backbone of construction, logistics, and industrial transport across Asia and Australia, often working in conditions that would quickly destroy more delicate designs. Hino engineers built their trucks around extreme reliability, not peak performance. Engines were conservative, thick-walled diesels designed to tolerate poor fuel, extreme heat, and long hours at constant load. Fuel systems were fully mechanical, eliminating dependency on sensitive electronics. Cooling systems were designed for tropical conditions, where overheating was not an inconvenience but a business-ending failure. Frames were heavy and uncomplicated. Suspensions were designed to carry abuse rather than comfort. Gearboxes were slow but nearly impossible to destroy. These trucks excelled in construction hauling, aggregate transport, and regional freight jobs that punished drivetrains relentlessly. What made Hino trucks especially tough was their forgiveness. Operators could overload them, miss maintenance intervals, push them hard day after day, and the trucks would keep going. That tolerance for abuse is the true measure of toughness in commercial transport. In many regions, Hino trucks from the 1980s are still working, often rebuilt multiple times, still earning revenue decades later. They didn't chase fame, they chased reliability, and they won. Number 6. International Harvester Transstar 2. The International Harvester Transstar 2 was never a glamour truck. It didn't try to impress drivers with style or comfort. It existed for one reason only: to work relentlessly in fleet service. In the 1980s, toughness wasn't measured by looks. It was measured by how many loaded miles a truck could accumulate before needing serious mechanical attention. By that standard, the Transstar 2 was a monster. International designed the Transstar 2 around proven, brutally reliable drivetrain options. Engines from Cummins and Detroit Diesel were paired with heavy mechanical transmissions that could tolerate abuse, missed shifts, and constant heavy loads. These engines were not tuned for performance numbers, they were tuned for endurance. Thick cast iron blocks, conservative RPM limits, and oversized cooling systems allowed them to survive in environments where downtime meant lost money immediately. The chassis design reflected fleet reality. Frames were thick and straight, resisting fatigue from years of hauling on uneven roads. Axles were oversized and conservative in rating, allowing operators to push payload limits without catastrophic failure. Suspensions were stiff, simple, and capable of surviving poor roads and overloaded trailers. What truly defined the Transstar 2's toughness was serviceability. Mechanics could access components easily. Systems were mechanical and logical. Problems could be diagnosed by sound, vibration, and experience rather than electronics. In an era when trucks were expected to stay on the road rather than wait in shops, this mattered enormously. Fleet operators loved these trucks because they were predictable. Drivers respected them because they didn't quit mid-job. The Transstar 2 wasn't legendary because it was perfect. It was legendary because it kept earning money year after year with minimal drama. Number 5. Scania 142-143. The Scania 142 and 143 series trucks were built with a philosophy few manufacturers dared to follow: over-engineer everything. In the 1980s, Scania engineers deliberately built trucks stronger than necessary. knowing full well they would be abused by heavy loads, poor roads, and long hours. At the heart of these trucks was Scania's legendary V8 diesel engines. These power plants were massive, torque-rich, and intentionally understressed. Cooling systems were oversized. Internal components were thick and heavy. The engines were designed to pull hard all day without overheating or suffering internal fatigue. Many of these engines easily crossed the million-kilometer mark with rebuilds rather than replacements. The frames and axles matched the engine's philosophy. Thick steel rails resisted twisting forces. Axles were built to handle constant overload. Gearboxes were heavy, mechanical, and brutally unforgiving. If abused, they didn't break easily, but they demanded respect. Mechanics often joked that Scania trucks were hard to work on. That wasn't a flaw, it was a sign of how densely built they were. Components were packed tightly because nothing was made thin or light. These trucks didn't flex, didn't rattle apart, and didn't age quickly. The 142 and 143 earned reputations as trucks that mechanics feared but respected. Once running, they rarely stopped. They defined European toughness not through marketing, but through sheer mechanical authority. Number 4. Mack R-series. If toughness had a personality, it would look like the Mack Trucks R-series. These trucks were built with an unapologetic attitude, heavy, loud, slow, and almost impossible to destroy. Mack designed its own engines, transmissions, and axles as integrated systems. Everything was meant to work together under extreme load. Mack engines emphasized torque at low RPMs, ideal for construction, logging, and heavy hauling. These power plants were not smooth or refined, they were brutally effective. The R-series frame was one of the toughest in the industry. Thick steel rails resisted decades of twisting and impact. Suspensions were stiff and uncompromising, designed to survive rough terrain rather than pamper drivers. Axles were massive, allowing the trucks to haul loads that would bend lighter competitors. What truly defined R-series toughness was attitude toward abuse. These trucks were expected to be overloaded, under-maintained, and driven hard. And they still kept going. Operators trusted them in environments where failure simply wasn't acceptable. The R-series didn't care about efficiency or comfort. It cared about survival. That's why so many remained in service long after newer trucks had been scrapped. Number 3. Freightliner FLC, FLD. The Freightliner FLC and FLD models defined a different kind of toughness, distance endurance. These trucks were engineered to live on highways, hauling heavy loads for hundreds of thousands, often millions of kilometers. Freightliner focused on durability through smart weight distribution and fatigue management. Frames were strong, but not wastefully heavy. Stress points were reinforced. Components were chosen for longevity under constant vibration rather than short bursts of abuse. Engines paired with these trucks, most famously Cummins and Detroit Diesel, were designed for long service intervals and rebuildability. Cooling systems supported sustained high-load operation. Gearboxes were heavy, mechanical, and capable of surviving missed shifts and driver error. The FLD became legendary because it aged well. While some trucks rattled apart over time, Freightliners stayed tight. Wiring lasted. Mounts held. Structural fatigue was minimized. That meant fewer breakdowns and lower lifetime ownership costs. For long-haul operators, toughness meant coming home again and again without drama. The Freightliner FLC and FLD delivered exactly that. Number 2. Mercedes-Benz SK series. The Mercedes-Benz SK series represented the peak of Mercedes' heavy truck philosophy in the 1980s. Build it once, rebuild it forever. These trucks were not designed to follow fashion cycles or meet short-term fleet targets. They were engineered as long-term industrial assets meant to serve for decades under extreme conditions. At the core of the SK series were large displacement, slow-revving diesel engines designed for continuous heavy load operation. These engines prioritized thermal stability and internal strength over peak output. Thick cylinder walls, oversized bearings, and conservative RPM limits allowed them to survive endless hours of hauling without overheating or suffering catastrophic wear. Many SK engines were rebuilt multiple times while retaining their original blocks, an increasingly rare concept today. The drivetrain philosophy matched the engines. Transmissions were fully mechanical, massively built, and designed to tolerate abuse. Missed shifts, overloading, and poor road conditions were expected, not avoided. Axles and differentials were deliberately overrated, providing enormous safety margins that allowed these trucks to operate far beyond official specifications. What truly elevated the SK series into legend status was structural endurance. Frames were designed to resist torsional fatigue over decades of uneven roads, construction sites, and off-road hauling. Cab structures were rigid and durable, capable of surviving years of vibration without cracking or loosening. This meant the trucks aged slowly, rather than collapsing structurally over time. In Africa, Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, SK trucks became symbols of reliability. They worked in deserts, mountains, conflict zones, and remote infrastructure projects, where failure was not an option. Many are still operating today, more than 40 years later, not as showpieces, but as working machines. Toughness isn't measured in horsepower figures. It's measured in how long a truck remains economically useful. By that standard, the Mercedes-Benz SK is one of the toughest trucks ever built. Number 1. Kenworth W900, 1980s era. No truck from the 1980s represents toughness more completely than the Kenworth W900. This was not just a truck. It was a platform for endless work, endless rebuilding, and endless survival. Everything about the W900 was designed with one assumption: this truck would be pushed harder than intended, for longer than expected, and repaired rather than replaced. The long hood layout wasn't about style. It was about engineering space and cooling. Massive engines from Cummins, Caterpillar, and Detroit Diesel were installed with room to breathe, making maintenance easier and heat management more effective. These engines were built for million-mile lifespans, often reaching them multiple times through rebuilds rather than replacements. The frame of the W900 was legendary. Thick steel rails resisted flexing under extreme loads, making the truck ideal for heavy haul, oil field work, logging, and long-distance freight. Unlike lighter designs, the W900 didn't fatigue quickly. It absorbed abuse year after year without structural failure. Gearboxes were heavy, fully mechanical, and brutally strong. Clutches were oversized. Axles were chosen for durability rather than weight savings. Everything about the drivetrain assumed human error and overload and was built to survive both. What truly separated the W900 from competitors was its rebuild culture. These trucks were designed to be taken apart and put back together repeatedly. Frames stayed straight, mounting points stayed solid. Owners didn't scrap W900s, they rebuilt them again and again. That's why many 1980s W900s are still working today, often wearing newer engines and components but retaining their original bones. Few machines in history can claim that level of longevity. The Kenworth W900 didn't just define toughness in the 1980s, it became the yardstick by which all tough trucks are still measured. Those trucks didn't rely on marketing or technology. They relied on strength, simplicity, and sheer endurance. Decades later, their reputation still stands taller than many modern machines, not because they were perfect, but because they refused to quit. Which 1980s truck do you think was the toughest ever built? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every one. If you respect real trucks and real engineering, hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned. Until next time, keep it heavy, keep it honest, and keep the legends alive.